since you talked about the 6 parameters, the 6 exams that you need to clear to be able to make it in Indian elections, and you said getting the caste coalition or the caste arithmetic right was key, and religion as well. How significant do you believe that this Ram Temple issue is going to be, the Ayodhya issue is going to be in 2019? You've now got the Supreme Court sort of setting up a constitution bench. When it will hear the matter, what comes of it, we don't know. The RSS saying you need to do it, move an ordinance. Is this going to resonate as significantly as the BJP imagines?
I'm sure a lot of political journalists have very strong views on this, and all I can say from my experience is this, that these hot button issues, when you try and bring them up too much before an election, I don't think they work that well, because the voters tend to get more cynical. And this is true not just of issues like the Ram Temple, but even when you give out
election
SOPs.
freebies.
Exactly, yeah. Freebies and SOPs, etc. The closer you do it to election time, the more the voter is cynical about it. And I think that...
So they might take the money but may not vote for you.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that it is something which, is very difficult to move the needle so close to an election. So I'm just not sure that at this stage of the game, doing that much is going to move the needle on these SOPs. The first election that I remember sort of feeling very passionately about growing up as a kid and coming back to Bijnor for that was in 1989, when Rajiv Gandhi was sort of standing for re-election, and just watching that from that vantage point. I was 15 years old, and I had a deep interest in politics for some reason already back then and following election campaigns. And I remember sort of him announcing a whole host of sort of SOPs at that point in time. And at that age, like many of us, sort of more naive and were very charmed by Rajiv Gandhi, the suave prime minister on the international stage with his great sunglasses and so smartly turned out. And then you sort of came here and you saw in Bijnor, and you spoke to people here about the cynicism of all this. And the first time that 2 things struck me about that, going back to 89, that what my caretaker, who sort of would take me out to the town square here in Bijnor to talk to people, that what I learned, both from him and by talking to people. 1, that SOPs don't work, but 2, also that he told me something in 1989. And sometimes, it happens when you do these road trips, that someone tells you something and
the filing cabinet throws something else up,
Yeah, but it sort of throws, it sort of sticks in your head.
Yeah.
And then, what he basically told me when I asked him that, why aren't you voting for Rajiv Gandhi? I was speaking to him, and he basically said that, अब हम लोगों का यहाँ पर मन बन गया है कि हर 5 साल हम किसी सरकार और सरकार को चांस देंगे. So basically what he was telling you was that nobody really makes a difference. And every 5 years now we want to give some other leader a chance. And so therefore if Rajiv Gandhi has to go, so be it. So I think that that's what it tells you, that the voter's mind, once it's made up, it's very difficult to change it. And giving last minute SOPs at election time, I just don't think moves the needle.
So, the fact that we've just had a budget and we've just had this farm package being announced by the government, 6,000 rupees is what the government has now promised to farmers. The first installment should go into the account by March, is what we're given to understand. You think it'll turn the needle at all? Will it quell some of this anger that we've seen across the agricultural community?
I don't think so. I think it's, it's too late. Now, I don't fault the government for doing what it's doing, because it's got to try and do something to sort of calm these nerves, but I don't think it's going to move the needle. I think that also by the time the money actually hits the account, and this is something which I've seen here, and this is my entire sort of issue, which is that the state is so broken. I mean, like an anecdote I have in the book is that in 2018 when we went to Madhya Pradesh, we just happened to land up at a bank, and at this bank we saw people complaining outside that how the checks that they were giving were just not clearing, for many months. It was a state-owned bank and the checks just weren't clearing. And he was speaking to farmers also, and they were telling us that when they go and try and claim the minimum support price from the FCI, they were just not getting that minimum support price and getting the runaround. So I think that this is where I feel that we just haven't focused enough on, that we keep launching one scheme after another, with no real accountability that how is the previous scheme done. So in fact, someone in the government gave me this fascinating statistic to say that he launched an audit to see how many schemes does the central government actually have in terms of the schemes they have or the schemes that they're assisting. And that count, believe it or not, is still going on. I'm told there are more than 1,000 schemes.
Just at the central level?
Yeah, just at the central level that they've counted. So you keep having this instance where it's scheme after scheme after scheme that you keep announcing in the hope that something is going to work and you feel compelled to do so. But in the end, the fact is that you end up also disappointing many people by just launching one scheme after another, because the previous people, think, hey, wait a minute, what happened to the previous scheme that you announced and what's the benefit that I got out of that? And the other lesson that we've learned from all our travels, and this is something we again found in our previous trip, was the fact that announcing a scheme for a particular segment is very dangerous. Because the moment you do that, you end up really sort of disturbing all the other constituents who feel, what about us?
Yeah.
So I think it was Kamal Nath or someone who told us on one of those trips back in Madhya Pradesh in 2018 that if you have to announce a scheme in India, do it for everybody.
So which is why universal basic income, don't do a minimum income guarantee, which is what the Congress is doing? Yeah,
in terms of the fact is that now where they have the money for this is a different issue, but if you have to do it, just do not discriminate, no matter what that means, because the moment you discriminate and you leave some people out, you've instantly created a constituency that's going to be against you.
Speaking of political leaders, and you just brought up Kamal Nath as well, who of course has now sort of got a new lease of life as the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh. But this issue of dynasty, and that keeps coming back into the political discourse, right? I mean, Namdar versus Kamdar, and that is the political narrative that's driving. Does it matter, or has the discourse when you travel through the country changed? The way that people look at dynasts today, is it different? Do they actually see them as people with baggage, with legacy, and as poor performers?
No, I think that dynasty is such an integral part of the Indian DNA that it is very hard for me to sort of imagine as to that it's going to only have a negative part in politics. Like one of the sort of facts that I quote in the book is that 2/3 of India's top 100 companies are hereditary in nature.
Yeah.
So in some way that they're also dynasties. Same thing in the film industry. So I think
the legal profession.
Yeah, well, I don't know enough about that, but you probably do. So I think that that's the thing, that it is just such an integral part of Indian culture that to say that dynasties is a negative, I don't think is the case. Now, what I do feel is sort of resonating a bit more with the public as we travel is the fact that if you happen to be single, that I think that to sort of play up the fact that you're single sort of helps, because then you're able to make the case
that I have nobody, aage na piche.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That I'm on my own, and I think that's what Modi has tried to do. I think that's what even people like Mamata Banerjee, I remember seeing her campaign in 2016 when we went to West Bengal, and she was under a lot of fire because of the entire chit fund scam, etc., all the accusations that were flying. And her appeal to people was that, listen, I'm on my own here, and here I'm in my slippers and my white sari. Who am I going to sort of steal money for? And that sort of theme, whether it was true or not, or whether you believed it or not, resonated with the people. And this is the big cultural change also I find, like in Indian politics, that in the late 1980s we looked at it. Of all the chief ministers in India and the prime minister, obviously, they were all married. They were all sort of family-oriented people.
Yeah.
Now, last year we looked at it, 1/3 of all chief ministers in India were basically single. And that, I think, is the big change, that how that has moved. And a part of that reason, and it's here true in UP as well, true with Modi as well, is trying to sell to the people the fact that if you're single, you tend to
be less prone to corruption.
Less prone to corruption, and also the fact that you then tend to be much more committed. That's how they tend to sell it. Now, the other thing is, as you know, the other sort of big rise has been in the a lot of the single leaders, single women leaders. And this trend, I think, was really sort of pioneered by Jayalalitha. And there will, since then, there's been Mayawati and Mamata Banerjee and so on and so forth. Now you can argue that Jayalalitha, etc., faced a lot of allegations as far as corruption and other things were concerned. But set that aside, I think what that also tells you about how hard the sport of politics is in India, that it's a 24/7 job.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I think it's especially true for women leaders, it's almost impossible to have a personal life in that. And it's, in a way, it's a man's world for them also, and they're trying to sort of break that ceiling out there. That's very difficult for them to do that. So I really feel that that this big trend in Indian politics culturally that I feel is the rise of
the single politician,
exactly.
the single political leader.
Yeah, I mean, the rise of single politicians in India. But at a time when, as you know, and that's a bit sort of discordant with the rest of the country, because as you know, the premium that this country pays on marriage is so huge.
I know.
And the pressure to get married.
Exactly.
Like so
You're a ticking time bomb if you haven't gotten married. But you know, since you talked about women leaders, I want to talk to you about the emergence of Priyanka Gandhi. Finally has decided to get into active politics, and UP it is going to be, Eastern UP. What implications will this have for the Congress party at all? Is this going to make any meaningful difference? Is it too late?
You know, like I've seen Priyanka campaign.
You've been charmed by her. I mean, the book is very, very clearly, suggests that you were quite charmed by her.
Yeah, I mean, as a campaigner, when we would go to Amethi and Raebareli, and we've been there many times, she has an incredible connect with the people. In fact, most of us who traveled felt that she was the one compared to Rahul. When we would go and see her on the campaign trail, right, back 15 years ago and things. The problem in this election is the fact that I think that the caste bases are already well entrenched, and for her to really come at this stage and make a big difference to that for this election in 2019 just seems like a very tall order.
Could there be a twist? Could there be a surprise?
Well, I think that people ask me that, and now again this is mere speculation. I think if she really wants to make an impact, then what she has to do is to become the combined opposition candidate from a place like Varanasi. I mean, if she were to do that, I think she could make an impact, because then it would that would be a sort of master stroke in terms of pinning down the biggest leader to the own constituency, even if she ends up losing that. But I think that that's the biggest impact she can have, according to me. But in Eastern UP itself, for her to make a big impact at this stage, I don't think is really possible, given how entrenched the caste bases are. But as I said, she is a very charming campaigner, and if she were to sort of spread her energy out, going to other states and campaigning, I think that she could resonate a lot. Like in the south of India, for example, there's still a lot. Like another fascinating sort of insight that we picked up when we were traveling, and something I mentioned in the book, is that how Indira Gandhi remains the most popular leader, most popular prime minister when people are asked to sort of vote for a prime minister. And the fact that she reminds them of Indira Gandhi, I think all that sort of plays to her advantage. So if she were to campaign across the country, I think that could have some impact. But in Eastern UP per se, to sort of move the caste base at this stage, I think is very difficult.
You said that when you saw Priyanka Gandhi 15 years ago, you thought that she was it versus Rahul Gandhi. He's seen many highs and lows. He's been feted and been put on covers and then, failed miserably. And now is sort of seeing a return, so to speak, after the electoral results in the 3 crucial Hindi heartland states in December. What do you make of the kind of change that we've seen, and what would that mean for the Congress party in 2019?
Well, I have to say most of us have been surprised, because when I think that we met him multiple times, starting from the first time we met him was in a hotel in Moradabad back in 2007, when we came to cover the UP election back then in 2007. And as I mentioned in the book that, we had a 2-hour interaction with him back then. And in the 2 hours, he spoke for 1 hour, 59 minutes. And he seemed very confident about every theory in the world. And immediately, it struck us that this is not going to cut it. That when you're sort of not listening that much and you're sort of speaking that much. And that pattern continued in our subsequent meetings with him. We saw some signs of that beginning to change when we met him in Pushkar in 2013, when he came to campaign there for the Rajasthan state polls in November of 2013. So I mentioned that in the book about the transition that we've seen him in. So clearly there's been a big transition as far as he's concerned. And in this campaign in 2018, the resonance that he was getting from the crowd was so different compared to what we saw when we went out in 2007. So
well, basically he had no impact in 2007.
In like 2007 he had no impact, and then 2009 when the Congress ended up doing well in UP, I think it sort of created this delusion
that it was on account of him.
Yeah, exactly, and I think like that's what sort of he took it maybe to his head also, because in 2010 when we met him in Bihar, he came across as very aloof and almost arrogant, not keen to even engage with us back when we met with him in 2010 in like Bihar. So I think that's as far as he's concerned, that he seems to have transformed a lot, but I don't know about how much of this current revival that we're seeing
is going to translate into votes.
No, more than that how much of this just has to do with the fact that some people begin to just tire of the incumbent a bit, and then they begin to see a lot of good things in whoever is on the other side.
It's the tawa ka roti thing that you talk about in the book, that you shouldn't keep a roti on the tawa for too long because it'll burn. And
that was a great quote by Ram Manohar Lohia, which is that sarkar tawe ki roti jaise hoti hai, usko palatते रहिए नहीं तो जल के राख हो जाएगी. And I think that sort of captured the fact that when a leader stays in power for too long, they become more arrogant, and so you need to keep sort of switching governments. Now, what that exact time should be, I don't know, but I think that's one of the things I feel about politicians in India and people who get to power. There's such a dramatic change in their attitude, which is that when you meet them at election time, especially before they've come to power, it's such a different persona. They are very charming. You will meet with them and they're sort of all into you and stuff. And the moment they become a minister or they get a big high posting, there's an immediate switch in their behavior. Like all of a sudden they'll stop taking phone calls. And so often we hear this complaint that we go to these constituencies out there. So often we hear that ever since they got elected,
they've never come back.
Exactly. They've never come back.
Including in many of these VIP constituencies.
That's right. So, they haven't come back. So you seem like such a switch. So therefore, I think that somewhere deep down, the voter also believes this, that nobody really makes that much of a difference.
So change.
Yeah. So, let's just keep changing them because otherwise they get too arrogant the longer they remain in power.
I want to come to perhaps what is going to be the most controversial chapter in the book, and you end with that, no country for strong men. I mean, the assumption maybe till a few months ago was that this was a done deal. 2019 was a done deal, and that Prime Minister Modi would return to power. And I don't know how it's going to turn out, but there are more questions today in comparison to what we saw a few months ago. Why do you believe that, this... You talk to people and they say we want somebody who's a tough decision maker, almost sort of who takes the command and control of a situation and so on and so forth. Why do you think that is not likely to work?
They say that, but I think deep down, as far as Indians are concerned, as I said, there's a tendency to root for the underdog. I think that exists in most societies and especially here, so like in India. But the reason I say that is not against any particular person, but the fact that I believe that democracy in India is thriving, and that, like at a time when we talk about a democratic recession in the world, where democracy is in retreat in so many countries and in places from Europe to even parts of Latin America, I think the fact that democracy is doing so well in India, to me, is the bullish message of the book.
That's what makes you optimistic.
Yeah, that's what makes me optimistic. And why do I say that? I say that for a few reasons. The main reason I say that this is no country for strong men has to do with the fact that I think that democracy is really thriving in this country, and given the diversity of this nation, it's very difficult for one leader to dominate this country in a very big way. And therefore, in India's entire democratic history, no party at the center has ever been able to get more than 50% of the vote share. And that for me is a telling statistic. And now it seems like almost 30-35% has become the ceiling for that. Whether it's the Congress in the past or the BJP, it's very hard to break that. So what that's really telling you is that it's very hard for one leader to completely dominate like this nation, given the diversity of this country. And the other sort of big bullish message of this book is that I feel so good about the fact that when there's so much angst in the world about how democracy is in retreat and these terms like democratic recession are used all over the pages.
It's thriving in India.
Yeah, of foreign policy magazines, that it is thriving in India, and there's some good evidence to back that up. One, as I said, is that the fact that we're going to have such a competitive election
Which no one would have thought was like the likely outcome at least a few months ago.
Or quite the opposite. Many people were in despair, like about 12 to 18 months ago, many liberals in particular, thinking that this country is going towards strongman rule. All the comparisons with Putin, Erdogan, Modi, etc. were sort of running thick. But the fact that you're able to have such a competitive election today speaks volumes about how deeply rooted democracy is in this country. And the fact that the incumbent in this country so often ends up losing elections, even though the incumbent enjoys incredible advantages, the most being money power. That, as you well know, that in like Indian elections, money plays a big role, or is supposed to play a big role. Typically, the incumbent ends up outspending the opponent by a ratio of 5 to 1, if not 10 to 1.
Wow.
And this government has, like at the center, has done that. I mean, the BJP, even in Madhya Pradesh when we went, even other states like Bihar in 2015, the spending advantage was incredible. But yet, the opposition was able to win. So the fact that despite all that money, despite the fact that they have such incredible sway over decision making in terms of, with corporates, and the fact that they have a fair amount of sway with the media, I think the fact that the incumbent still loses, and even this government faces such a competitive election now, speaks volumes for how powerful democracy in this country is.
Speaking of strong men, and you write about your encounters with Prime Minister Modi a few times, that you've met him, and they haven't all ended well. They perhaps started well but didn't end well. There's been no attempt to reach out to him post that?
I think that, he sort of at some point in time, for good or for bad, took the view that this group keeps raising the issue of Gujarat riots maybe a bit too much. And so I think that that's really what led to this sort of,
acrimonious parting.
Yeah.
And it was an acrimonious parting.
Yeah. I mean, you can say that.
Yeah,
yes,
he walked out.
Yeah, in terms of, well, after spending some time with us, but yeah. So I think that really has, what ended up being, as far as like the issue is concerned. But subsequently, we have, met other BJP leaders, including Amit Shah, a couple of times. And yes, these meetings do tend to be a sort of, much more rough. But, the only thing which I will say to these leaders is that even if you take the example of Trump in America, I find it quite remarkable that Trump also tends to be very hostile towards the media. Just look at the way he sort of, has this absolutely bitter accounts with the media in public.
Yeah.
And in private, whether it's the New York Times or CNN, he's trying his best to quote them. He like engages with them. He wants to still give interviews with them. He still wants to be liked by that crowd. And so I just wish that we'd have a similar sort of atmosphere here, where it's fine to have a public posturing also if you need to. But at the end of it, you want to sit down and you want to sort of have a conversation, even if the person happens to be an opponent. And I believe that in the BJP too, there are basically sort of, two sides to the BJP too. There are many leaders in the BJP who are like that. Whether it's got to do with Rajnath Singh, Nitin Gadkari, even to do with Sushma Swaraj. These are all leaders who may sort of not like your ideological views, but at a personal level, they'll be very happy to engage with you. And I think that's the way I would like politics in this country to return. Instead, we are in this very polarized environment where if you end up saying something which sounds, as if you're taking sides, which may not be, it may just be like analysis, then you end up sort of being seen as someone who's hostile to the other side. And so therefore, my only plea to the current leadership would be the fact that, let's engage at a private level, even if at a public level it suits you to posture against the media.
Well, I don't know if anything's going to come of that or not, but let me ask you, Ruchir, you said that, you at the end of this book and all of your travels, you're optimistic about electoral democracy in this country, and you believe that it's thriving as opposed to what we're seeing happen in the rest of the world. But what about India in general, and specifically about the Indian economy? How confident and optimistic do you feel about the Indian economy today?
I think that as far as India is concerned, my view has long been, and this is, right from the time I wrote my first book, that we're never going to be able to be like China, because we just don't have the appetite for taking those kind of economic decisions. And there's one way that you can look at it. That China never created a welfare state until it really created a very well-developed infrastructure. So it invested record amounts in roads, bridges, ports. That's where it completely featured. It was almost a form of ruthless capitalism that they followed. In India, unfortunately, we are now building a welfare state well before we have the means to do so. And what that means is the fact that the money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that money will end up getting sucked out of the kind of expenditure which leads to higher growth rates in the future. So that's just the reality of India. So I think as far as India is concerned, this entire dream of growing at 8-10% China-type growth rates, I don't think is going to be realized anytime soon. The good news, having said that, is the fact that the private sector is sufficiently open and liberalized enough to sort of carry the country forward in terms of what it's doing. And I feel that the institutional quality is still very much there, where you will not see a complete breakdown in the situation like in this country in terms of law and order, or to even do with runaway populism. Like the big risk that I think is increasing, but I still don't feel that we are there as yet, is if we end up having complete runaway populism out here. I still feel the institutional quality is good enough to keep that in some check, to keep some check and balance over that.
So let me end then by asking you, Ruchir, over the last 25 years, all your encounters with political leaders, which are the ones that have been most memorable, the ones that have surprised you?
A common feature in the book is the fact, when I was speaking to my American editors, what surprised them the most was the unusual intimacy that they got to see between the leaders and us, or even the voters. For example, in the book, I have 4 encounters where we have met with politicians in their bedrooms. Starting with Mayawati in 2002, Lalu Prasad Yadav in 2005, Ram Vilas Paswan in 2014, and in 2016, when we met Captain Vijaykanth.
On his bed, not just in his bedroom.
And that was possibly one of the sort of most entertaining encounters we have had with any politician, where we were able to barge into his hotel room to have a conversation with him, and there he is, and we have some photographs of that, trying to cover himself up in the sheets to apparently hide his modesty, but also sort of so endearing to be able to meet us like in that sort of format. So I think that that's what really makes these trips so special, about seeing that side of India, about seeing this intimacy and seeing the warm hospitality that people extend to you. Like anywhere you go, immediately the food is rolled out. So we've had some amazing food experiences on these trips. Like people in my group remember that, the best samosas we ever had were at Lalu's place. The best laddus we ever had were at Mulayam's place. So you remember this, the best food we have ever had was in Madurai in terms of the Chettinad cuisine. So it's that part, and that's what I've tried to do in the book, that how does India smell, how does India feel when you're traveling in these places. Now, of course, sometimes you have to make do with no meals also. I mean, one rule I have on the trips is that you don't have any lunch because of the fact that we want to cover as much
ground as possible.
And the moment you have lunches, they end up become 2-3 hour expeditions. So I'd say a lot of great encounters with politicians. At the end of the day, I come back respecting politicians more after these trips, even though we love to sit back in our living rooms and hurl a lot of abuses at them. Yes, I think there's a lot broken with the state. There's a lot more that can be achieved, but at an individual level, when you meet them, you come away feeling much more charmed by them than sort of being appalled by them. And so for me, that's one of the more positive messages of the book.
Would you ever consider getting into active politics yourself?
Oh no, no. I mean, in terms of, I think
just an observer.
Exactly. I think that if this political system here is not very friendly to outsiders. So I think that it's, for all the reasons we have discussed, whether it's got to do with dynasties or just the fact. Also, the other fact I feel is that just how big the constituency sizes are in this country. That for a new person to paradrop in and to make an impact is just so difficult, because the size of the constituency, when I tell, like the size of many small countries at a parliamentary level, and even at an assembly level at times, but at a parliamentary level it's so big. So it is so difficult for you to paradrop into the system and to sort of either win or even make an impact. So I think that I'm best served by observing these great tales that we get to see of democracy in India, and also the fact that this is my true love, and why would I want to give it up to actually go and do something else.
Well, yeah, fair point. But the question that everyone is asking, what in 2019?
Yeah. Yeah, of course, everyone's going to ask that question. I think that, like as far as that's concerned, as I said, that every scenario is in play. And that is very different from what the situation was a year ago. A year ago, like it was considered a near certainty that Modi was going to be re-elected. Today, I think every scenario is genuinely in play, or whether he comes back, like all these Delhi theories, or what happens in terms of the fact that the BJP gets less than X, do they have some other leader, or you end up getting, like an opposition comes to power. But just look at India's history, which is that it is so difficult to predict who will be the next Prime Minister, because very few could have predicted Narasimha Rao, Manmohan Singh, Dev Gowda. Just very difficult to predict in terms of who will be the next Prime Minister, because this is a true parliamentary democracy, and
even though we want to look at it as a presidential election.
No, but who's we? I'm not sure. As I said,
well, that's the maybe popular narrative today.
Yeah, maybe in Delhi, Bombay, and some of the foreign investors like to think of this as a presidential kind of, like election. But really, if you come here and talk to people, everyone's sort of looking at their sort of, their local allegiances. So I think this presidential narrative is a very simplistic narrative at the center.
Well, Ruchir, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us. We wish you the very best of luck with your latest book, and we hope that you continue to enjoy your travels across India.
Yes, I'll be back on the road in end April 2019.
And we look forward to hearing from you about that trip as well. But for now, from all of us here on the road to democracy, thanks very much for watching. We'll sign off from Bijnor. See you later.